All right, thank you all for joining me today. I think I'm going to get started. Um, you all signed up for to learn about our new grant program in the NEH's Office of Digital Humanities, and it's called Dangers and Opportunities of Technology: Perspectives from the Humanities, and we are calling it the DOT program. My name is Sheila Brennan, and I'm a senior program officer from ODH here to chat with you about this new program for 2023. The webinar will be recorded and the slides will be shared on the program website. So you can return to it later if you wish or recommend it for your colleagues who may not have been able to join us today. I also wanted to let you know before we begin that there is live captioning available for the meeting. Not everyone's team interface will be identical, but you should find a toolbar that's either near the bottom or the top of your screen containing an ellipses. So where the yellow arrow is here on the slide, but it's near the reactions and the hand raising functions in that same toolbar. When you click on that, it reveals a menu with different settings where you can turn on captioning. Right, so during the webinar today, I will review the program's goals and possible activities funded through DOT. I'll go over the deadlines and eligibility requirements, and then we'll walk through the components of an application. We'll look over the review criteria, and you'll get a sense of the review process timeline. And last, I'll provide you with some contact information and links to assist you and tips to assist you in the application process. That should leave us about 25 to 30 minutes for questions at the end. And I will be joined by my colleagues in the ODH. So I'll just ask that you save your questions until the end. You can post them in the chat, but we won't be responding until the end of the program. So let's get started. Some of today's most challenging questions are intertwined with specific technologies and their dramatic impacts, both positive and negative, on our health, the environment, social interactions, our government and democratic processes, cultural and educational institutions, but nearly all aspects of our lives. So our goal in the Office of Digital Humanities is to support research that's analyzing technology broadly defined and its impact on society through the lens of the humanities or the humanistic social sciences. For the DOT program, we are specifically interested in projects that examine current social and cultural issues where technology plays a key role. So projects may address a wide range of topics. I'm only listing a few here just as examples, such as climate change, racial justice, social media, disinformation and the democratic process, medical technologies, wealth inequality, data privacy and ethics of algorithms, cryptocurrencies and non-fungible tokens, supply chains and infrastructure, educational technologies, the streaming economy, just to name a few. We know that many of you listening today already engage in research in these areas, and we are hoping to attract scholars like you from a wide range of disciplines to this program. So you might be asking what kinds of activities the program can fund, particularly if you haven't applied to the NEH before. The program is quite flexible, so you must propose a project, and it can be at any stage of its development. And funds can pay for things like course releases if you're teaching faculty, travel to archives, research assistance, such as undergraduate or graduate students. It can also pay for community partner participation. The process of planning and hosting, inviting, putting together a field-wide convening, in a way to bring people together in the room who aren't usually talking to one another about a specific topic. We can also fund things like conducting studies or interviews, oral history collection, other kinds of data collection and analysis, experiments or prototyping, even designing of curricular materials, as well as publications of all kinds, such as articles and books, as well as other kinds of intellectual outputs, such as contributing to mini documentary films, websites, podcasts, etc. There are a few things that this program does not fund, and that includes course development or new majors or minors. And that's because there are other programs at the NEH in the Education Division designed to support that kind of work, as well as projects that are primarily funding equipment, such as for outfitting a lab or a makerspace. And then I just want to remind you that, as with all NEH opportunities, projects cannot seek funding for the following activities: for the promotion of a particular political, religious, or ideological point of view, advocacy of a particular program of social or political action, support of a specific public policies or legislation, lobbying, or projects that fall outside of the humanities and humanistic social sciences, nor the performance of art, creative writing, autobiographies, memoirs, or creative nonfiction or policy studies. So now some of you might be asking how we define the humanities and humanistic social sciences here at the NEH. Well, if you go to the About page on the NEH website, we do have a definition that was part of our founding legislation. And we define the saying that the humanities includes, but is not limited to, the study and interpretation of language, linguistics, literature, history, jurisprudence, philosophy, archaeology, comparative religion, ethics, the history and criticism, theory of the arts, as well as anthropology, ethnography, American studies, Africana studies, all area and ethnic studies, gender and queer studies, science, technology and society, rhetoric and communications, media studies, economic history, etc. It's not meant to be exhaustive list, but I say this just to let you know that this program does accept work that's in humanistic social sciences and interdisciplinary work as well. So let's move on and talk about who is eligible to apply and review our deadlines. So this program is designed for U.S. and territorial institutions only. And this includes nonprofits, all kinds of nonprofit organizations, as well as cultural heritage organizations, um, institutions of higher education, state and local governments, and federally recognized tribal entities. All organizations need to have active registration with the SAM.gov system. And this is important because if your organization hasn't applied to the NEH in the past or not recently, this system provides your organization with a unique identifier, which is required to apply for this and for other federal opportunities. Um, I also just wanted to let you know that an institution may submit multiple applications for separate and distinct projects with different project directors. So that also means that an individual may only serve as a project director or co-director for one DOT application per deadline. You also may not request funds for the same activities in more than one grant application. That's the no double dipping rule. Also, for this program, graduate students may not be project directors or co-directors, but they may serve in other project roles. Now, the first program deadline for DOT will be February 2nd, 2023. That is Groundhog Day. So no matter what happens in Puxatawny that day, notifications will not come early nor in 6 weeks. But you will be notified by August of 2023. That will give you enough time if your proposal is not funded to revise and resubmit for a second deadline, which will come in early October of 2023. We will be switching to a fall deadline. So then the next opportunity after October 2023 will be October of 2024. We will be announcing those dates in early next year, early 2023. All right, so how much can you request in funding? Well, we've broken down the DOT program into two funding categories. One are projects that are led by a single researcher and submitted by an institution, and they may apply for up to $75,000. And then the second project category are projects led by collaborative teams. And this is where there are two or more project directors, and they may be from the same institution or from different organizations. Independent scholars may serve as co-project directors for this category of funding on collaborative teams. And these teams may apply for up to $150,000. And the funding period for both categories of projects is up to 2 years. So now that hopefully we've wet your whistle for this project, you want to know, well, how does one start the application process? So we ask you start with the program resource page, which I have snapshotted here and contained a shortened link. This contains all of the information that you and your institution will need to apply. So when you get to the program page, you'll need to keep scrolling down the page, and that's where you will find all of the links to pertinent information about the program. So as you scroll down to the middle of the page, you will find something labeled Step 1, Review. And underneath this menu, you will see, or collapsed heading and menu, you will find the Notice of Funding Opportunity, or the NOFO, which is in Fed parlance. These are formally known as the guidelines. So if you click on this link, it will open a PDF containing all information about the application requirements, which is the soup to nuts document. The second link goes to grants.gov, and this is where your institution submits all of the applications on behalf of a project director in a team, and it's via that system. So that is where the actual application lives, which is on grants.gov. There are two application packages, one for projects led by single researchers, the other for collaborative teams. All forms, such as the cover sheet and budget, are available as fillable forms that must be used within grants.gov. And there are slots where your grants or research office will upload your narrative, your work plan, and other attachments as part of the entire application. I'm not going to go into how to fill out those forms during this call. So let's return to the NOFO. And I'm going to direct, if you go to page 7, you will see an application components table. And this is a checklist of all of the required pieces that must be submitted in order for your application to be complete and eligible. Please note page limits, such as with the narrative and other required components. If you're submitting an application as an individual researcher, your narrative cannot exceed 4 pages. But if you're a collaborative team, you get up to 6 pages. But please note that no application can exceed the 3-page limit for work plans. I can't stress enough that you need to check in with your institutional research office or your development office soon if you're interested in applying for this program or really any federal grant program. Go to them early and inquire about internal deadlines and requirements. And then you can also hear who is responsible for completing which pieces and by what date. So as you're preparing your application, let the different components, particularly the narrative section and prompts, guide your writing and use them to build your argument to convince peer reviewers that this project should be supported with NEH funds. As with most grant applications, you want to write clearly and for general audiences. Just think about how you might explain this project to someone who is not in your field, especially if it's very technical. Like, how would you explain this to your dean or perhaps to your board? So in the narrative, you'll use the first section to explain your argument, articulate your research questions and methods, define the technologies to be explored, as well as discussing any ethical frameworks guiding the project. Then we want to hear how your project would contribute to and advance existing work. Describe how the project and your methods will complement, challenge, or expand relevant studies in the field. Using the activities and research team sections together with the work plan gives you a chance to explain more specifically about the work proposed, the timeline for completing it, and who will be doing what tasks over the course of the grant. As you finish the narrative, you'll need to describe what you or your team plan to produce by the end of the grant period and how you will share the project's results with carefully identified audiences in an accessible way. Importantly, we ask you to explain how you will credit the project team and collaborators for their work, if that is applicable, once the project is available in its final form. Next, I'm going to go through the 4 criteria by which panelists will evaluate your proposal. And these criteria are found in the NOFO starting on page 27. But you'll notice throughout the NOFO that we map the review criteria with specific sections of the proposal. Again, that's to help you to write your application with the review criteria in mind. So the first criterion is the intellectual significance and impact of the project for the humanities. So mainly here, remember that panelists are looking for projects that fit the program's remit to support humanistic research that explores the relationship between technology and society and the potential for the proposed outcomes to enhance understanding of current social and cultural issues. Reviewers will be looking for how well you've crafted your research questions and your plan for addressing them, and then how you've situated your project within the existing literature to demonstrate a need for this research. They will also look to see if the dissemination and outreach plans are appropriate to reach the identified audiences and communities for the project. So, 2 is the quality of the conception, organization, and feasibility of the methodology, activities, and work plan. Reviewers want to see realistic work plans and will assess how well the methods proposed fit the goals of the project. They'll look to see if appropriate project personnel are associated with specific tasks in the work plan, and if applicable, they will assess the appropriateness of the project's plans to ethically manage data. I also want to remind you that you can include annotated screenshots, schematics, design drawings, and other visuals, or even a long bibliography in the appendices attachment. So review criterion 3 is the qualifications, expertise, and levels of commitment of the project director or directors and key project staff or contributors. Reviewers are looking at who's on the project team and if they, including the project directors and the team assembled, have the experience and expertise appropriate for completing the project's activities. I also just want to remind you here that project directors need not have PhDs. They need not have PhDs in a humanities field or be employed by a humanities department. Also, independent scholars may serve as co-project directors. So reviewers will also be looking to see how team members will be credited for their contributions to the project, as I mentioned earlier. We'll also want to hear about the plans for professional development or mentoring that will be available for early career, contingent staff, or students and interns who might be working on the project. The last criterion relates to the reasonableness of the proposed budget in relation to the proposed activities, staff compensation, the anticipated results, products, and dissemination. So here panelists be looking to see if the budget aligns with the project's goals and activities. Panelists increasingly want to see that contingent faculty, graduate students, or members of local communities participating in a project are compensated fairly for their time. If the project includes collaborations with other institutions who are subrecipients, contractors, or even individual consultants, panelists will want to hear how the lead institution will manage any project deliverables beyond the period of performance. For example, if the lead institution is doing research on a particular data set, but they're not hosting the data set or results from an experiment, but a collaborating institution is, our panelists just want to hear if the collaborating institution has a plan for managing that data, perhaps depositing it in a secure digital repository. Um, the NEH now requires budget justifications or budget narratives now for all of our applications. And you can use this document to explain any institutional norms or requirements related to salaries or perhaps even, something like student wages. You might want to explain that the university caps undergraduate research assistant wages at $10 or $12 an hour. Or there might be a museum that limits honoraria to visiting scholars or visiting researchers to $250. Anything like that that might help our panelists get a sense of the kinds of things that your institution sets a limit on or requires to help us understand how you've crafted your budget. I'm just going to wrap up with a few reminders and tips. First and last, read the NOVO. Use it as your guide. Follow all the directions, include all required attachments, adhere to all page limits. Um, we don't want to have to disqualify an application because you ran over the narrative page limits by 3 pages. So we can't just cut that off. You do have to pay very close attention to these things. Um, you have to submit your application on time. Late applications are not accepted. Please be sure to gather all your materials, send them to your colleagues who are submitting the application on your behalf as early as you can. You don't want to learn that one of your documents is corrupted at 11:55 p.m. on deadline day, and then it's not possible to submit it on time. Also, don't include CVs or resumes. This program requires 1 paragraph biographies or biosketches for named personnel. And also for projects that are led by collaborative teams, please note that co-project directors must submit short letters of commitment. Now, here are a couple of quick tips. Again, I'm repeating myself for emphasis here. Write clearly and concisely for a general audience. Avoid jargon and overly technical language. You are the expert in your research, but you also need to make your work comprehensible by non-experts. I find that it's helpful to ask someone outside of my field to read a draft, and you might want to do the same. Also, do your best in the application to demonstrate how your work can make an impact and increase our understanding of contemporary issues through your research project. Also, propose to share your results widely as appropriate for the topic and the project that you're proposing. And design a feasible project with a reasonable budget. This is public tax dollars, and we take that very seriously here at the NEH. All right. Next, I'm just going to go over the review process and schedule, answering that question of why it takes so long to hear from the NEH. So once you've submitted an application, and the deadline, the first deadline is February 2nd, 2023. It takes 6 to 7 months for the NEH's rigorous multi-step review process to be completed. So first, the ODH staff review all submissions for completeness and eligibility. Then we break down applications into different panels as best we can by area of practice or by method. And then we recruit up to 5 panelists with an appropriate mix of subject matter, methodological, and project experience to review applications. Peer reviewers have about 6 weeks to read and evaluate proposals on their panel, and then everyone gathers for a virtual discussion. The ODH staff then makes our recommendations after the peer review process is complete. And then those recommendations are reviewed by the NEH senior staff. That book of recommendations are taken before the National Council on the Humanities, who meet 3 times a year to review applications across the NEH. So that means applications for the February deadline will go before the July Council. Then after the council meeting, NEH Chair Shelley Lowe will make all final decisions about awards. So then finally, by mid-August, early to mid-August of 2023, you, the applicants, will be notified. So I hope you have a better sense of why it takes so long to hear about a submitted application, even though it is really hard to wait that long. So please get in touch with us. We are here to help. If you have follow-up questions following the webinar that maybe don't get asked during the Q&A, please send them in an email to odh@neh.gov. Um, it helps if you have questions about fit for the program. It helps if you can send a short project summary that describes the program's goals. We are not reviewing drafts for this program, so please don't send drafts. Um, and if you are interested in this program but don't think you'll be applying in February, please consider volunteering to serve as a peer reviewer. You can also email us at that main odh@neh.gov email because we always need more peer reviewers. I also include a link to some resources that have been put together by my colleagues here in ODH, a variety of resources on different grant programs, as well as to links to other resources for all NEH applicants. I'm also including the link here to the grants.gov support page. Um, I just want to emphasize, if you are having trouble with submitting anything through grants.gov, you have to contact them directly. So we at the NEH are one of many federal agencies that use this system for managing grant application submissions. And we actually have no control over the system and can't troubleshoot on your behalf. So you do need to get in touch with them. And again, that's another reason why it's really important that you even begin the submission process as early as possible in case you just run into any snags. Again, a corrupt file, a misformatted PDF, or something that isn't accepted very late on deadline day. All right, so I'm going to keep this contact information up on screen for the moment, and I'm going to ask that my colleagues from the Office of Digital Humanities to join me for the Q&A period. And I am going to, let's see, I need to open up the chat here. And I'm going to ask, let's see, if there are any questions. Let's see, Jen or Elizabeth, are there any questions from early on that were submitted in the chat that I or we can address?
We did early. This is Jen. Have a question about notifications and when funding can begin that you addressed on one of your slides, but we also have a
Great.
question about would firearms be considered an eligible technology for study?
Yes.
Another one of the questions, can we work on multiple topics to make a case?
I'm not sure what that means. Let me see. Let me see who that person is, and I'm wondering if they would be willing to, if I enable their mic, if they would be able to, let's see. I'm sorry, Jennifer, can you, I can't
Mhm.
find who that person
Sure.
is to enable their mic just because there's a lot of chat right now. Sorry
Yeah.
about that, folks.
Let
We'll
me
get it.
see. Yep. I will follow up with that person and see if
Oh,
I can get them to ask the question.
okay.
Another question that we have, and then we'll go to some of the raised hands.
Mhm.
Um, uh, are postdocs allowed to be project directors?
Um, yeah, from the NEH's standpoint, yes, they are. Now, your institution may have different rules. I say that as someone who came from an academic institution, and there were specific rules at the university as to who could serve as a project director in a grant application. So from the NEH's perspective, or at least from this program perspective, a postdoc may be a project director. Yes. Um,
And we do have a raised hand from
yeah.
Sean Lenardi. Sean,
Yes.
did you want to ask your question?
Let
Let's
me
see.
see. I think, Sean, I have allowed your mic, so I think you can unmute yourself if you would like to speak.
Hi, thank you.
Oh, it worked.
I was
Great.
just I was just wondering if a strong application should be focused on a single output, or might a project be organized, say, thematically around a single topic, but produce a series of programming like that might be pedagogical in nature and research oriented in nature throughout the time frame?
I mean, potentially. I think it really depends. you know, you don't need to do multiple or have multiple outputs. It's okay to be working towards one thing. I think in a case like that, um, our peer reviewers would want to see a really strong work plan that's detailed to so that you can convince them and show them that you have sort of the time bandwidth and perhaps team members to accomplish all that you are proposing. So I don't think, I think it really just depends on the project. I think either could work, but you'll just want to make sure, um, not to overpromise.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And Sheila, we have another question in the chat, and this one is from Andrew Lisson. Can you speak a little bit about the motivation of separating the DOT areas of focus from the NEH Digital Humanities Advancement Grant Program, or DAG? Specifically, if we have applied for a DAG in support of a critically oriented project in the past and received some positive feedback, how would you suggest modifying that proposal for this opportunity?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So thanks for that. So the that priority that has been in the Digital Humanities Advancement Grants Program about history critique of digital culture has actually been removed for this round. I didn't want to confuse things too much if there were folks on the call who are not familiar with the DAG program by introducing a new grant program, a different grant program. Um, but yes, so we are asking folks who may have applied for research critique of digital culture and technology in the past to move over and consider the DOT program. DOT has slightly different prompts and requirements. So obviously you'd have to dig into the NOFO a bit and sort of see where those differences are for revising and resubmitting. But yes, I would encourage you to consider DOT this round.
Thank you. Sheila, this is Jen again. Justin Walsh, who I know had a question that was answered also by Brett earlier, but I wanted to make sure this one was covered. Given that this is under ODH, is a digital component considered necessary or a priority?
No, that's a great question. A digital component is not required. So that is definitely a difference from the DAG program. Also, the technologies need not be digital and an output need not be digital or a digital project. So that's a really good question. This is a little bit of a departure, at least in recent years, for ODH projects. So yes, thank you. Good question. All right, Christopher Jackson. Let me see. I'm allowing your mic and you should be able to unmute yourself.
Thank you. It's actually Christoph, but that's okay.
Oh, I apologize. I just thought it was cut off in my Christoph, please.
No, I love that. That's always something that happens. That R is always a little extra on the end. No, but I just wanted to thank you so much for hosting this program. We are actually currently looking at music, medicine, and technology, and looking at cognitive development in the brains of individuals, especially adolescents, as they're sort of engaging with social media and performers. We have ultimately what we're interested in is, how social media and technology affects within aspects of culture within social media as well. Does that affect it? We have a team of neuroscientists, clinicians, and musicians. So we're kind of all looking at this collaborative. We're also looking at this collaboratively with respect to the players who are involved from the NEH. I myself have a PhD in both piano performance and neuroscience, and the other individuals are actually also in medicine. I just wanted to sort of ground that, because a huge part of what we're creating is a cultural database where we want to look at culture and technology as it pertains to how people are learning with respect to neuroscience, even though we haven't really addressed how technology has disrupted and changed how we learn in the arts.
Wow. I mean, it sounds fascinating. Yeah, I mean, potentially. I think it really depends on sort of what those outputs are, and maybe there is someone on your team already who has this experience, but
Actually, I
perhaps
do.
a Oh, okay. I was going to say
Yeah.
like a cultural historian, right? Or someone who is familiar with, perhaps other moments of, like the introduction of radio or something, who can also kind of comment or contribute to the driving research questions in terms of like cognitively, like what other things have changed or something like that. So I think, just trying to ground this project or sort of this application in strong humanities questions.
Yeah.
I think, potentially, yes.
We
I would
have a
say, oh, yeah.
just as a little bit of like clarifying. I have a one of the colleagues is an ethnomusicologist
Hmm.
in Oklahoma. Other
Hmm.
is in New Orleans, where I'm actually from.
Okay.
The other is actually at FSU. And we all came together and started to realize that there actually isn't a digital database for technology as pertains to culture and music traditions. We also have one of my co-researchers is Native American, has looked at stress and music and resilience. I personally have studied music, brain, and stress, especially amongst musicians during COVID. Um, and so we're literally realizing we came to take together and start realizing that how people experience music, stress, technology, and how people really relied on that and how that shifted learning and changing and what were some of the effects. Um, and then we also are working with another group that has a lot of data for adolescent brains and their cognitive development as it pertains to social media. We're really interested to see how that pertains to culture, technology, and learning, especially when it comes to like music.
Great. Yeah, I would say why not contact us afterwards for some follow up and
Absolutely.
sort of share more specifically in terms of like what project it would be. I mean, area wide, probably, maybe, but like it's also about the project. Everybody's got
Yes.
their own field, but then it's like, well, what are you proposing here? And so just to give everyone else time to ask questions during the session, I think if you could email for a follow up, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Neat stuff. Yeah. All right. Um,
So I can see,
we've
this is
got
Jen again, that Brett and Elizabeth are answering questions in the chat, but I'm also keeping an eye on it to make sure they're all answered. We do have a question about the letters of commitment that the project directors need to submit.
Mhm.
Um,
Yes, I am seeing some of that. So the letters of commitment do not need to come from the project director who is from the lead or the institution who is submitting the application. So if the University of Maryland is submitting the application and the lead project director is from the University of Maryland, they do not need to submit a letter of commitment. If their collaborator is at the University of Delaware, that co-project director will need to submit a very short letter of commitment on the project. If there are named personnel who are participating and who are doing main activities, substantial work in the project that are not from the lead institution. So let's say there is someone, from a community archive in Baltimore who is working on it and is, either subcontracting or a consultant. That would be the case where we'd want to see a letter of commitment. But the requirement is for co-project directors at a different institution.
Sheila, this is Jen again. I wanted to circle back to that question we had at the beginning,
Mhm.
because we did have a little bit of follow-up in the chat about working on multiple topics to make a case for an application. And there was a follow-up in the chat, like climate change, racial justice, and others. So if I'm understanding our questioner correctly, a number of the topics or bullet points that you had, can they work on climate change and racial justice as a
Sh-
topic area?
Yes, yes. I mean, I think that many of these are overlapping, intertwining issues. So yes, that's perfectly fine. I think we really wanted to signal to you all, to your colleagues, to the field that that through this program, the NEH is really interested in funding research in these areas. So we thought that it was really important to spell some of these things out. But no, it does not have to be in that list, and it doesn't have to be only one of those topics. Yes. Thanks for the clarification.
We also have a question, and I can't quite tell that if it's been answered or not, but I'll just say it out. Can overseas collaborators serve as co-directors?
That's a great question. I think it depends. I think if they are as a as sort of a an independent, as if they're an independent scholar or not affiliated with an institution overseas, I don't see that as a problem. I think the challenge is that U.S. NEH funds can't go to a foreign institution. So so you can have individuals who are not U.S. citizens, individuals who do not work at U.S. institutions, who are consultants. They would be listed as consultants in the budget, and they can, or even as a, sort of like an individual contractor, that is allowed.
Thank you. And we're now, and she's been waiting so patiently. I want to make sure we have an opportunity for you to call on her.
Oh, Michelle.
And this is Michelle White. She put a nice question in the chat, and she also raised her hand. So if I'm watching it correctly, it's her turn.
Thanks, Michelle. Thank you for waiting. Thanks for your patience. I enabled your mic, so you should be able to unmute yourself. Oops. Did we lose? Oh no.
Well, her question is an excellent one. Yeah, I'm not sure if she's still with us, but her question is an excellent one. How can you expand?
Oh, wait, I think I hear.
Oh,
Michelle?
good.
Sorry, anyway, I've got it
good.
now.
You're here. Welcome.
Your patience. Now we've both been patient. Thank you so much. So I wanted to get back to the indication of ideology, and I was hoping that you could expand on how projects associated with a particular ideology are not fundable. How do you balance addresses to endangered and oppressed groups with ideas that such studies come from a particular perspective? And I wanted to add, so for an example, academic feminist analysis, queer theory, how do such critical frameworks get understood in terms of the concerns of the NEH and ongoing debates globally? Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question. Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think that it's sometimes it's a fine line. What I would encourage you to think about here is that you're proposing a specific project. It does not, it's not all of your work, perhaps. It could be a piece of something. And so the funding that you are looking, that you would be requesting would be for specific activities. So we could not fund time for, working on a policy statement or a policies document. We could not fund, a trip to a legislature or somewhere where, you would be taking a stand on a particular issue. And so that's sort of where this is. It's about the funds requested, the activities requested for this project. So we are not interrogating your whole body of work or ideology that you are applying to how you work as a scholar. We're assessing, and we can only assess what's in the application and what you are proposing to do with these federal funds. Does that help? In the vagueness that I'm trying to, I'm also trying to walk a line here too.
I'm not even sure if can you still hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I think, and I think this is an ongoing kind of dialogue within academia. I understand that like policy-based activism is not allowable. But I do think, in thinking about anti-feminisms at this moment, or, kind of the challenges people have accessing healthcare based on being people of color, that these in some groups are understood as ideology. So I'm trying to figure out, is it a matter of the kind of actions? Is it a matter of the kind of critical frameworks? How is this parsed in terms of this grant, or maybe even more broadly at this juncture?
Had to happen at some point. I was muted. So anyway, so for this and other NEH grant programs, I mean, for this particular program, you are proposing to examine a specific technology, right? And a research project that is about that and how that informs these contemporary issues. So, in terms of the ways that you are laying out your evidence-based work and the way that you're framing it, I mean, it's you are you are producing a specific project with specific activities, and I think that the broader case of how let me see. I'm trying to think of the best. Like, I'm not totally sure that I understand what your question is. Like, I know it's a broader, bigger question. I can really only sort of address it on kind of like on a project by project basis. And the like I think you're meaning like how is advocacy defined, right? Like how is, and I think it really is more about direct political action that is funded through this proposal.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
sure. Thanks. All right. Let's
So I see that
see.
Brett
Lots of
just
good
asked,
questions.
answered a question about institutional affiliation. And this might be one, in case anyone is not following along on the chat, that we could read out as well. And that's what is meant by an institutional affiliation? What should a nonprofit that serves as a cultural center do in this case as it relates to the project director with an institutional affiliation?
Yeah, well, and I think Brett addresses this. So if the institution is a nonprofit, the institution is eligible to apply, and they may name a project director. They may name whatever kind of project director they wish. It could be someone who is a full-time staff member of that organization, or someone who is affiliated with it in some way. Yeah, Brett said like someone who's a fellow, or maybe someone who's a board member or something along those lines. So you just, kind of have to you don't want to apply on behalf of an institution without an institution knowing you're doing that. But I think that, yeah, a cultural center is an eligible applicant, and they can decide who they find, who they wish as a project director. And I'm going to mic myself so I can cough.
And then we have a question from Joshua Cruz. Would something as broad as developing empathetic dispositions hold merit in itself for funding, or would you recommend tying an idea like empathy into those other projects mentioned in the CFP, like climate, racial justice, etc.?
Yeah, so I mean those I'm not even sure that I know exactly what you mean by that, and that's my own deficiency. I will admit. So anything like that, any kind of output like that, you'd want to really explain in detail so that the peer reviewers are very understand the kind of work that you are doing. And something that is somewhat concrete, or at least so that so and that you also perhaps offer a definition of what success looks like with if that is a kind of output. Yeah, anyone else, feel free to jump in on that one, but
I also might remind to keep us focused on the questions in the
yes.
RFP that you are addressing in your narrative, and that includes the how you're framing this around the idea of technology as technology. So yes, thank you, Elizabeth. We are thinking along the same lines. So
Exactly. Yes. Like if you're talking about, a certain like putting on a headset and living in working in a virtual world, like the question of does that create more empathy if you are embodying someone other than yourself, right? Like that is a good question. Could be a good question. Because it's tying to both a specific technology and also how it is affecting its users.
let me scroll up and make sure that one of us at least of the 4 Office of Digital Humanities staff that are with us today, that all of the questions have been answered in some way.
You all have been amazing, both Brett and Elizabeth and Jen. You have been attacking the chat, which is wonderful. Thank you so much. Let's see, I think most of these questions have been answered.
And if we haven't, if we've somehow let it get lost in the stream, if you wanted to put it back in, so you'd now be at the bottom and brought to our attention.
Yes, fair enough. All right, great. Any more questions? Great. I hope that you all, that this is getting the ideas churning and that you'll consider applying. I know the question was asked a couple of times in the chat. I do want to emphasize that we are not accepting drafts for this program, but we can answer some specific questions about the application process. And if you are curious about fit, sending a short project description, not a summary of your work broadly, but specifically what kind of project, what you are seeking, the kinds of activities you're seeking NEH funds for. That will be helpful for us in sort of saying, yeah, this seems like a good fit or not. This does not guarantee that you will be funded. As we noted, we're hoping to fund between 9 and 12 projects that we will announce. Let's see, we'll announce in August. So you also will get a chance to see what is funded in the first round if you're not quite sure. And we will have an October deadline. Unfortunately, I don't have the date right now, but it'll be early October for the second round. And all right, fantastic. Thank you all for coming today. This webinar will be recorded. It is recorded and it will be posted on that program resource page, as well as a copy PDF of the slides shared today. So thank you all, and hope to see some of those applications coming in February.